Welcome to the Brother Henry and You show. I am your host, Henry Harris. It's such an honor to be here with you today. Today, my special guest is Karl and Laura. They are both authors and the hosts of Desert Sanctuary. They have over 20 years of pastor and counseling experience. In 2016, they both went through what many of us would call a deconstruction period or a deconstruction of their beliefs, and they stepped down from their third church. They both are very passionate about holding space for survivors of religion. So we're so honored to have them on the show today. Today, I just want to kind of come and talk about this subject. I don't really know too many. Maybe they've addressed it, but I don't know too many shows that are covering this. And we like having uncomfortable conversations here. And I
Mhm.
reached out to one of my friends, Sherry, and I said, "Who do you know that would be able to uh, address this subject?" And she had recommended, and I'm very familiar with them through what they do and the work that they do and how they help people. And I said, "Well, sure." So we've been corresponding through email and was able to get them on the show, and I'm so delighted to have them today. But um, God hates divorce or abuse, and I know that may come across a little strange to some people. Some people say, "Well, of course God hates divorce," or they'll say, "Of course God hates abuse of any kind." But I think the way we're coming at it, as I was just telling them prior to the episode, that typically people who are in abusive spaces, especially in religious circles. Sometimes they'll go to leadership or somebody in the church that has a great influence in their life. And sometimes it brings them to a place of taking their advice. You should work it out. No, I mean, and they don't even really know what's really going on. They know the person is being abused, and I don't know if it's a reputation thing of the church or it just makes the church look bad to tell someone, you need to leave that marriage or abusive relationship. But there are other instances where they're told, and I think in a very insensitive way, that the Bible says God hates divorce. And I'm thinking to myself, like, is that all you have to offer
Mhm.
to justify your stance on someone remaining in a abusive marriage? And then they'll start quoting scriptures to justify why they need to stay in it. And so I'm my words are kind of like off a little bit, but it's just that
Yeah, I'm
it's just
tracking
one of
with
those.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those subjects that's very hard to cover, and I just don't see how if you're going to believe in God, um, I just can't reconcile nature, God, universe, however people want to refer to it, that God would somehow endorse
Mm.
this. So when you encourage someone to work out their abusive marriage or start quoting scriptures at someone, in essence, it's almost like you're saying that you know God does hate divorce, but in essence, he's all right with the abusive part. I mean, that's what I think they're saying. So I'm so glad to have you both on today. The victim of an abusive marriage claims that I say she because I know men get abused too. So if this applied to men,
Hmm.
um, it can be applied to men. But most people that come to me is women in regards to situations like this. So the victim of an abusive marriage claims that she is in a abusive marriage. The common response from most within Christian circles is, "Well, God hates divorce," which is oftentimes said by some form of males in leadership.
In power.
What,
Yeah.
why do you think victims of abuse in religious circles are often told this? That's the question. Either one of you can answer that question.
Yeah. So I was a pastor for 20 years, and then I went through a deconstruction. God definitely hates divorce if God exists.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
it causes chaos. It disrupts families. Um, it pulls back from our need for connection and disconnects us. So there's all types of bad things about divorce or separation or tearing apart, just like any broken relationship. But if there is a God, God also has to be about human suffering, and He has to
Hmm.
care about human suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I just say you can't trust the narrative in the Bible because for this reason. Um, our first book we wrote, I actually wrote it. It was called. Can't even remember what it's called now, um, but it was
Was it Apparent Faith?
Apparent Faith.
Mm-hmm.
That was just my idea of if God is real, then He can't be worse than me.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I would never send my kids to an eternal conscious torment for minor offenses. For talking back to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the God of the Bible would. Um, so, but I also wouldn't make a woman who's being abused and maybe her children are being abused stay in that relationship because even when I was a fundamentalist evangelical, I wouldn't give that counsel
Mm-hmm.
because just imagine what's going on behind closed doors with that woman and those children. It's violence, it's manipulation, it's torture many times, just because that. And for the examples I know about are a lot of white guys that want to stay in
Mm-hmm.
power, and they want that power and that hierarchy in their family, so that they can um, have control, have things, and not have to go to counseling or work on it or anything like that. Um, So you could make a case from the Bible for manipulation, abuse, power differentials, slavery,
Hmm.
all of those things. But the problem is someone wants to stay in charge,
Mm-hmm.
and the pastor usually he just wants to sweep things under the rug because if we have a sexual abuse scandal in the church, what will that do to the church? What will that do to my career?
Hmm.
And those are the kind of things they're protecting. They're not necessarily being true to the Bible or God or their
Mm-hmm.
intuition or their humanity. They're not being true to any of that. They're just saying, I don't want to lose what I have.
Right.
So don't make any waves and you guys just tough it out and then that'll build character. And I don't know if I answered your question, but I think
Oh yeah, you've answered it. It makes a whole lot of sense now why they would quote. I love what you said. How the people
fear,
people can
most
use people
fear.
can use the Bible to justify anything, like you just said.
Yeah.
And that is so true. And what I was getting ready to say was it really explains why a lot of people would just grab any scripture um, to promote their, I guess, religious bias for to encourage someone in an abusive situation. Like you
Hmm.
said, if God exists, to encourage someone. And in my own personal opinion, if I was in, this is just my perspective. If I was in an abusive relationship or marriage, I wouldn't care what God thought about it, whether He exists or not,
Hmm.
or what Christians would thought about. Oh, well, they quoted that scripture to me, so I guess I'm gonna have to work it out. I'm like, that's irrelevant to me where I'm at now on my spiritual journey. Um, and it's only for my own sake. I just want people to kind of get to that place as well. But no, you did answer the question. The next question is, um, what is the motivation behind using scripture to justify someone to remain in an abusive marriage? You said something like about hierarchy, staying in power. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because there
Yes.
has to be some type of agenda or motive why they're so dismissive to what the victim is going through, only to build themselves up more, as you just said, kind of
Mhm.
sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, and in counseling and recovering from our own religious trauma, we've done a lot of work in that area, and it's amazing how many times things come back to fear, um, and we don't like to admit it. You know, what if Henry? What if when you marry your fiance, somehow she got physically stronger than you, and society approved of her being in charge. And think about if she was tormenting you or abusing you, what lengths would you go to get out of that? Would you allow one verse to change that for you? I mean, I think you'd be, this has got to stop, and you'd be sounding the alarms all over the place. But somehow, because of a pastor's fear, a church's fear, a husband's fear, he probably is frustrated he can't lead, right? And he's, if I'm for kind of shared leadership, but um, he's just afraid, and he's trying to make his world more orderly, and that's the only way he thinks he can do it. We just need we need more education, and we also kind of need to shy away from this idea that we need a patriarchy. We need, some gross person in charge because they're mean. Um, we need to, and I'll tell you what all the women say that we talk to when we interview women. They say, listen to women's stories
Hmm.
and believe them. And if you'll do that, you'll be a lot better leaders, and you'll treat women the way they should. And you'll also, but guys like to read books on leadership and theology and that kind of stuff. That's what we do most.
Mhm.
Yeah. What is Laura's perspective on what we're addressing now? Does she got anything she would like to say?
I have a couple thoughts, really. So I think that there's just so much contradiction, right? I mean, I think the
Hmm.
Bible in itself contradicts itself. However,
Exactly.
like when the Bible says, God hates divorce, I just always have been taught that, God is love. So it's confusing to me that he would hate something um, more than he would love the people that are being abused and hurt
Hmm.
in a situation. So, that was a lot of my deconstruction journey, was just saying things are just do not line up. There's too many contradictions within the Bible, in my
Hmm.
opinion, within our church and faith communities. And, I want to speak a little bit to what Karl said about the whole disconnection piece, because I mean, Brene Brown says it best that we're hardwired for connection. And so if you think about divorce being a disconnection, it's not only a disconnection from our spouse, from possibly our family, but if we go through that inside the church, we're looking at a disconnection from our faith community too. And
Hmm.
sometimes I think that when we throw that God hates divorce, as I'm going to speak from a woman's perspective, I just think it keeps women trapped in that situation because of the level of disconnection that could possibly come. Instead of faith communities rallying around the woman or the man or wherever, whoever is experiencing that abuse, we have a tendency to shun, to shame, and to foster disconnection rather than connection. So I really struggle with that, because I feel like on the one hand, we say God is love, the church is a representation of Christ and his love.
Hmm.
We are the bride of Christ, and, and yet in the same breath, we can say, but God hates divorce, and somehow excuse abuse away, which fosters such, you know, great disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so true too. And thank you for taking the opportunity, Laura, to share that. Um, does the church or the pastor have a place in determining what works for a person that's in an abusive marriage? The church, in some instances, as you guys know, you've had a history of being a part of the church in the past. The church, in some instances, have a strong influence on many marriages, causing the victim to adhere to what leadership may suggest what they should be doing. Why is this a big problem?
Hmm. I would. You said. I just don't. I think most times they're not qualified to do
Mm.
that.
Hmm.
There was nothing in. I went to seminary. I was halfway through my master's degree, I had very little about that I learned about counseling. I certainly didn't understand how the brain works. 20 years as a pastor. I had problems in my own marriage that I wasn't addressing properly. So I think that's a misnomer. I had an experience though I've never been Catholic, but in the Catholic Church they have, in some other denominations, what are called spiritual directors, and they're not directors. They don't tell you what to do, but they listen to you. They help you get in touch with your body and help you heal and things like that. They're trained over 3 years to do that, right? But most pastors don't have any kind of mental health training. They may or may not be in a good marriage themselves. They may or may not be an abuser themselves. So it seems to me like, I don't think as a pastor for 20 years, I don't think I had anybody ever come in and be really, really honest with me. They were always putting on their best face. They weren't talking about real problems and real solutions. We're just trying to find a Bible verse to placate us for the moment and get us through the next day. And then we could go on suffering for Christ, which,
Yeah.
in this topic, this is my big thing. I want to say this, Henry, that we had a thing in our church with bikers against trafficking. And the woman that spoke had been trafficked by her dad for many, many years. And she just made this statement to me when we first met. She said, "Why didn't God do anything about that?" And that was what started my deconstruction, because any other father, the father that trafficked her, but most fathers would step in, would stop that, would do something about it. So, that's kind of where we end the hang. But as to your question, most pastors just aren't qualified to do that. And then I would hope they'd learn in these days about trauma-informed things and about how to protect their church from getting into that situation instead of trying to manipulate their way out of when they get in trouble.
Yeah. Was Laura getting ready to say something?
He kind of just took it from me there at the end, but churches are not trauma informed. They are not trauma informed, and they really should be when we talk about the things that Karl just mentioned. When you have pastors who are expected as part of their position to counsel people. I mean, I remember that, bikers against trafficking, when they came, and, she asked a question that I'd probably asked for years, and the thing that people say in response to that a lot of times is, well, God was there. And, I will not cuss on your show, but I just want to say, well, then he was a pretty crappy God if he sat there and watched you be abused. So that response,
you could be yourself on this show.
I get angry because we, in the name of keeping the organization running, be it the church, we bypass some incredibly harmful situations and heap on more trauma and shame to people that are already experiencing trauma and shame. And, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, and I have learned about trauma-informed classrooms, and I practice being a trauma-informed educator, being a trauma-responsive educator. And, if that is something that school districts are moving toward, because there's a lot of kids with trauma, especially post-COVID, how much more should our faith communities be trauma informed? You have so many people walking through your doors every Sunday that, like Karl said, have slapped on a smile, but are the walking wounded. And if we just don't ask questions and we just don't bother to go deep and sit with people in their woundedness, then we can just keep the machine running. And that's sad, in
At
my
the expense of
opinion,
the
at the
people.
expense of the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, they go into this stuff about, well, let's just pray, let's fast about it. All the things that's really, it's really not helpful towards the victim,
Right.
like
It's
at all. And
bypassing.
yes, yeah, spiritual body is
Mhm.
some of them have even gone to the point instead of being trauma informed, they view trauma as something that's demonic.
Yep.
Hmm.
So
Which is
instead of
which
becoming
is
trauma
traumatizing.
informed, yeah, that's traumatizing.
Mhm.
It's like somebody that's going through trauma, that may be their demon. They're like, why are you trying to demonize and use the Bible to, well, this is something you need to be delivered from, or if they're in an abusive marriage, the enemy, and I don't really believe in that, the enemy is attacking your marriage. It's like, no, not really. We need to throw some stuff out on the table and discuss these
Yeah.
things and stop. I got a show coming up here soon about. I'm glad Laura mentioned about spiritual bypassing. I didn't know what that really meant till I started looking into it, and it's a really serious thing,
Mhm.
and it happens a lot in the
Mhm.
church, and no wonder why people have reached a place where they either don't believe in God anymore,
Mhm.
or don't want to, or they're like, okay, if God is like this, forget it. Like
Mhm.
I'm fine without it. So
Right.
Robert Augustus Masters has a book about spirit, just called Spiritual Bypassing.
Mhm.
It's very, very good. It was key for me,
Mhm.
and just realizing how much a part of religious life that is.
And
Do it
also,
all the time without
yeah,
thinking.
and also, like, I think it first starts off with people spiritually bypassing us, but then I think we have to look inside, because I know I've been guilty of bypassing my own emotions,
hmm
bypassing my own feelings, my own belief system about things, whether I thought, that is so contradictory, that can't be true. Um, let's take the LGBTQ population.
hmm
Our denomination was like, well, you can, hate the sin, love the sinner. Basically, you need
Yeah.
to hate these people because of the lifestyle that they have. And, it, sadly, I bought into that. Now, was I overtly like hateful? No, but my thoughts were still like, these why should we accept these people? And I
Yeah.
tell you what, after leaving organized religion, I have felt more free to
hmm
love people, whereas I felt like inside of organized religion, that was
You
not
couldn't do
allowed.
that.
That was not
Mhm.
allowed. Certain populations of people are demonized, like you said, and once again, that leaves the church responsible for creating disconnection between people, when what they should be doing is creating connection.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the LGBT community, 'cause I had somebody the other day saying, Brother Henry, I can't believe you put. I had a transgender lady on the show, and I got a lot of hate from pastors and people. And to like, I
Mhm.
can't believe you approve of that lifestyle. And I said, number one, they never asked for my approval,
Right.
Right.
and I'm not going to exclude anyone
That's right.
because of their sexual orientation or who they are or what they are. Years ago, prior to my deconstruction, I really was never, well, now that I think, I really never was an exclusive type of person. But at the same time, when you're really heavy in ministry and speaking in different churches, you don't come out open and say
Mhm.
that you're LGBT affirming, or it's
Mhm.
almost. I guess I'll wrap it up like in this way. What I'm trying to say, it's almost like anybody that's demonized and marginalized. It's almost like the church don't even pretends like they don't even exist.
Mhm.
And if Jesus existed, if you read the stories, it seems like in some instances, uh, he was here for those type of people. So it's almost like if you're going to follow Jesus in that framework, how come we're not seeing a connect? And I really don't see a comparison
Hmm.
between the two if they're going to follow that narrative. They don't look nothing like the Jesus that I
Right.
see that's reaching out
Yeah.
to the poor
Hmm.
and marginalized and people like that. It's and more so encouraging people to stay in an abusive relationship
Hmm.
or I mean marriage. Um, I just don't get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it's, it's bypassing, what's the least of these? The Bible tells us to, you know, minister to the least of these. And I think when I think of that, I think of the woman in the abusive relationship. They always talk about they had to get small
Hmm.
because of all of that. Not being treated right at home, not being validated, they're not being heard, they're not being listened to, and they just get really small. And I would think that can't be anything like what Jesus had in
Hmm.
mind when he said, "Love your neighbor." Care for people and minister to people, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I just can't see how keeping the business of the church running should take
Hmm.
precedence over that.
Hmm.
Um, I never have condoned that, even when I was an
Hmm.
evangelical, and um, it's just like Laura said, we're walking wounded, and it's almost like as a nation in the United States, including the churches, we're just walking wounded, injuring each other, and we got to stop that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. What should you do if you are shamed into staying in an abusive marriage? A lot of uh, um, I'm not saying this don't happen in society, but we know it's very prevalent in the church where they're often shamed into staying. That God put y'all together. You need like Laura would say, you need to work it out. It's like, and some people feel so that shame becomes so strong where it's almost like their motivator to working it out, no matter what's going on behind closed doors. The pastor clearly doesn't care. So, what's your message to someone who feels so much shame where they make that ultimate decision based off of shame? Well, I'm just going to stay in this abusive environment because someone shamed me into it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I I think first of all you got to find support,
Yeah.
you know, and find those groups that are out there. There's some in the progressive circles. There's some in the um, uh, non-believing communities, non-religious communities.
Hmm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of resources out there to help, and you have to have your resources in place. And but you will never get better in a where the problem started.
Hmm.
You know, whether it's a high control family, a high control church, or an abusive relationship, you're never going to get better while the
Inside of
abuse
that.
is still
Hmm.
happening, because
Hmm.
that husband, that pastor, that church doesn't even understand the problem. And in a way, they can't until you get separate and they can have some time to do some counseling and therapy and trauma informed recovery and things like that. But you got to reach out to help. You got to, and at some point, you got to tell your story.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah.
the hardest part. And you have to find people that are worthy of hearing your story, people that you can trust, and find those people, tell your story. Um, I would say expect to be believed, but don't be surprised when they don't. But you find those people that will hear your story and believe you, and then build that support system. And I think in almost all situations, you got to get away from that
Yeah.
situation before you can solve it, or even have a chance at making it better. Just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I just think that where there's abuse, there's chaos. And it's really hard to think clearly when you are in the middle of chaos. I mean, if we just think of any chaotic situation, a lot of times our executive functioning um, aspects of our brain kind of go offline, and it's really hard to think um, more rationally and to really like take a step back, like Karl was saying, and see the situation for what it was. So I do think that that is the first step. And the beauty of it is like shows like yours, right? And things like the Desert Sanctuary. And there's so many communities out there that people can remain anonymous and just reach out for help. And yeah, so even, you're probably not going to find it. I'm not saying you would never find it inside of a church, but
Yeah.
again, their first priority, in my opinion, is to keep the organization running. And so whatever that takes, they'll do. And but there's definitely many types of communities out there to reach out to and find the support that you need.
There's nothing wrong with compassion and empathy. But when you feel those things, you also have to use that to set some boundaries for now, at least, right? So that you can get better.
And going back to our own deconstruction, I mean, our leaving the church was not because like we wanted to get a divorce and, they were telling us God hates divorce. But once we stepped out of organized religion, we really began to like the filters kind of came off. The blinders started falling off. We could see things for, what they really were, or we could evaluate things that maybe were taboo to even question or evaluate inside the church. And so, like Karl said, kind of, if you have to find a way to step away, even if you're not able to like just pick up and leave that relationship at this particular moment, but finding those times where you just find some clarity somewhere, whether that's in an online community, a trusted friend or guide, or just taking a drive and really thinking about things to gain some clarity on the situation.
Wow, this was a powerful conversation. I would like to carry the conversation on in the comment section. So let us know your thoughts about today's show. And Carol and Laura, I want to say thank you for your friendship. Thank you for taking this time to be on the show. For more information about Carol and Laura, they do have a website. We got it on the stream. It's called the desertsanctuary.org. And can you tell people where they can watch your podcast? I know you guys have wrote some books. How can people connect with you in that way?
Yeah, most of the things that we do, you can find through the desertsanctuary.org. We just follow that.
Books are on Amazon, right?
Books are on Amazon. Everything kind of. So the podcast, The Desert Sanctuary, is on
YouTube,
all the places. Yeah, it's even on YouTube as well.
We are doing a course right now.
Yeah,
though.
we're excited about that. We're doing a course called Recovering from Religious Trauma. That was our latest book. And so we're taking each chapter of the book, kind of reading some of it and discussing it with ourselves. Those take about 8 hours or 10 hours to do all together with all the time we put into each lesson. But we're releasing them on YouTube and they're on the podcast also in audio form. So people can have them for free, at least for now, anyhow. We want people to have access to the resources. But we on our website, there's a treasure chest of like religious trauma resources. So we've got links to the Vashti Institute and all those places that deal with abuse and survivors and things like that. So start at our website and go from there. Have fun.
Yep.
Hope to hear. Awesome. Yeah.
Tonight's question is, do you believe God approves of working out an abusive marriage? It's a heavy loaded question, but I'm looking forward to hearing your response. Thank you so much for watching. It's time to connect. Make sure you connect with us on youtube.com/Henry Harris 100. Also Facebook.com/The Brother Henry and You Show. Till next time, we'll see you next week.